I watched my wife die on our front lawn, not in a movie, not in a nightmare. In real life, while my children screamed her name and begged her to wake up, the woman who pulled the trigger wasn't a gangster. She wasn't a criminal from the streets. She was an HOA, Karen, clipboard in hand, rage in her eyes and hate in her voice. All this over a rule violation. 1 second, my wife was holding our youngest, trying to calm the situation. The next second, a gunshot shattered our lives forever. Blood, silence, screams, and me frozen, knowing nothing would ever be the same. What happened next shocked the entire city. The trial exposed secrets no one expected, and the final verdict made headlines across America. Stay with me, because this story doesn't just twist, it breaks you, then shocks you back to life. Before this story goes any further, I need to ask you something. Where are you watching this from? Which city, which state, which corner of the world? Drop your city name in the comments, because this could have happened anywhere. And if you believe real stories deserve to be told, stories that expose truth, pain, and justice, subscribe to this channel right now. Because once you hear what I witnessed, you'll understand why silence is dangerous. This isn't a story I ever wanted to tell. I was a husband, a father, a regular man living in what everyone called a perfect neighborhood. White fences, smiling neighbors, strict HOA rules. They promised safety. They promised order. They promised peace. What they never promised was humanity. My wife believed in kindness. She believed problems could be talked through. She believed that if you stayed calm, people would listen. She was wrong. The woman who ended her life had been watching us for months. Every trash can, every parking angle, every blade of grass, warnings taped to our door, fines mailed weekly, glares across the street. I ignored it. I thought it was petty drama. I didn't know it was building towards something deadly. That afternoon, the sun was bright. The kids were playing. No sirens, no danger, no warning signs. Just a knock on the door. And within minutes, my children learned what fear sounds like. And I learned how fast a life can be erased. Now, take a breath. Because from this moment on, nothing in this story is safe, simple, or predictable. Let's begin. The morning started like any other lie we told ourselves was normal. I woke up before my alarm because our youngest had crawled into our bed sometime after midnight. My wife was already awake, scrolling through her phone, smiling softly like she always did when she watched the kids sleep. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence HOA communities brag about in their brochures. "Trash day," she whispered. "Don't forget." I nodded. That sentence mattered more than it should have. Trash day had become a battlefield. Our trash cans had to be placed exactly 12 inches from the curb. Lid closed, wheels facing inward. No earlier than 6 a.m. No later than 6:30. One mistake meant a warning. 2 meant a fine. 3 meant a compliance visit. The warnings always came from the same woman. She lived directly across the street. Blonde bob haircut, oversized sunglasses, clipboard pressed against her chest like a badge. She wasn't officially HOA president, but she acted like she owned the entire block. We called her Karen in private. Out loud, my wife called her ma'am. That morning, I rolled the trash can out at 6:14 a.m. I checked the angle twice. I even measured the distance with my foot, like an idiot. That's what fear does. It turns grown men into rule-following children. When I came back inside, my wife was packing lunches. The kids were arguing over cereal. Life felt ordinary. Safe. It was a lie. Around 11:30 a.m., the doorbell rang. Not a friendly ring. A long, aggressive press. My wife glanced at me. "I'll get it." I should have stopped her. She opened the door, still holding our youngest on her hip. Karen stood there in broad daylight, sunglasses on, clipboard raised. "You're in violation," Karen said immediately. No greeting, no warning, no human decency. My wife stayed calm. She always did. Violation of what? Trash can placement, Karen snapped. You rolled it back in too early. I documented it. I stepped closer. That's not true. Karen's lips tightened. Sir, I have photographic evidence. She shoved her phone forward. A blurry picture. Timestamp unclear. Nothing definitive. My wife smiled politely. If there's an issue, we can discuss it with the HOA board. That sentence flipped a switch. Karen's face changed, like a mask slipping. Her voice rose. Neighbors' doors cracked open. Curtains shifted. You people think rules don't apply to you, she said. That's the problem with this neighborhood now. I felt my chest tighten. We follow the rules. Karen laughed. No, you pretend to. My wife shifted our child, sensing the tension. Please lower your voice. You're upsetting the kids. Karen's hand trembled. I noticed then she wasn't just angry. She was shaking. You've been warned before, Karen said. This is escalation. Escalation to what? I asked. Karen reached into her oversized purse. At first, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. The black metal, the grip, the way her fingers wrapped around it with terrifying familiarity. No, my wife whispered. The gun came up. Time slowed in a way people don't believe until it happens to them. I remember the exact sound of my daughter screaming. I remember thinking this can't be real. I remember the sun reflecting off Karen's sunglasses, so I couldn't see her eyes. The shot was deafening. My wife collapsed before I could move. She fell forward, shielding our child with her body, like instinct had written its final command. Blood spread across the concrete, bright, impossible red against the pale driveway. My children screamed. I screamed. Karen stood there frozen, gun still raised, mouth open like she couldn't believe what she'd done. Then she ran. Neighbors poured out. Someone called 911. Someone took the kids. Someone pulled me back when I tried to lift my wife, even though I knew it was already over. The sirens came too late. At the hospital, a doctor told me words I'll never forget. We did everything we could. That night, I sat alone in a house that no longer felt like home. The kids slept at neighbors. The trash can still sat perfectly aligned by the curb. I stared at the door, at the bloodstain that wouldn't wash out, and at the realization that the woman who destroyed my family would soon claim it was an accident. But this story wasn't ending there. Because what Karen didn't know, what she couldn't control, was what came next. In the courtroom, in the evidence, and in the verdict that would shock the nation. By the next morning, the neighborhood didn't look the same. Police tape wrapped around our driveway like a warning label. News vans lined the street. Strangers stood on sidewalks, whispering my wife's name like it was a headline instead of a human being. Karen was arrested before sunset. They found her 3 streets away, sitting in her car, still wearing the same sunglasses, still clutching that clipboard like it could protect her. The gun was in the passenger seat, loaded, safety off, and yet she cried. She was hysterical, one officer told me later. Kept saying it was an accident. An accident. That word followed me everywhere. Karen's lawyer wasted no time. By day 2, statements were already circulating. She felt threatened. She feared for her life. She acted in self-defense. Self-defense against a mother holding a toddler. I sat in the interrogation room when detectives asked me to recount everything. Each word felt like dragging glass out of my chest. They showed me the body cam footage. Karen screaming. Karen dropping the gun. Karen saying, I didn't mean to. But there was something else on that footage. Something the defense didn't expect. Before the gun came out, Karen said something quietly, venomously, something the microphones caught. You people don't belong here. That sentence changed everything. Detectives dug deeper, and what they found cracked the case wide open. Karen wasn't just a nosy neighbor. She had a history. Police reports from another state. Prior confrontations. Restraining orders quietly settled. HOA disputes that ended in threats. And then came the emails. Hundreds of them. Karen had been obsessively reporting my family for months. Trash cans, lawn length, parking, noise complaints during hours we weren't even home. One email stopped everyone cold. If they don't comply, I will make them. That wasn't HOA language. That was intent. The prosecution built the case piece by piece, brick by brick. Surveillance footage from neighbors showed Karen pacing our driveway weeks before the shooting. One clip showed her photographing our children playing. The courtroom gasped when they played that video. Karen sat at the defense table, suddenly very small, hair pulled back, no sunglasses, no clipboard. Just a woman facing the weight of what she'd done. She pleaded not guilty. The trial date was set. The kids asked where their mom was. I told them she was watching over us. They asked when she was coming home. I had no answer. The trial lasted 6 weeks. 6 weeks of reopening wounds I didn't know could bleed again. Witness after witness took the stand. Neighbors, HOA board members, police officers, medical examiners. The medical examiner's words echoed in my head. Cause of death, gunshot wound to the chest. Range close. Close enough to see her face. Karen testified in her own defense. She cried. A lot. She said she felt cornered. She said my wife advanced toward her. She said she thought the baby was a weapon at first, a sentence so absurd the courtroom erupted. The judge slammed the gavel. Order. Then the prosecution stood. They didn't yell. They didn't insult her. They showed facts. They played the audio again, slowed down, enhanced. You people don't belong here. They showed Karen's HOA emails, her past police reports, her escalating behavior. They showed the trajectory of the bullet. And then they showed the jury something that broke me completely. My wife's final act. The forensic expert explained how the angle of the wound proved she turned her body away from Karen, shielding the child. She was not advancing, the expert said. She was protecting. I cried openly. I didn't care who saw. The jury watched Karen's face crumble. She had no answer for that. The verdict came on a Friday afternoon. The jury deliberated for 9 hours. When they returned, the courtroom stood. On the charge of first-degree murder, guilty. Karen collapsed. Her lawyer caught her. But it wasn't over. Because the state had announced something unprecedented. They were seeking the death penalty. The courtroom exploded. The judge restored order. Karen screamed. It was an accident. But accidents don't come with months of threats. Accidents don't bring guns to rule disputes. The sentencing phase began. Victim impact statements were read. I stood at the podium with my children's drawings in my hands. Drawings of a mother with angel wings. This wasn't just a murder, I said. It was a warning about unchecked power and hatred. The jury listened. And somewhere in that room, justice finally started breathing. But the hardest part was still ahead, because the final decision would test whether the system truly valued innocent lives or just pretended to. The penalty phase didn't feel like court. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, waiting to see who would be pushed. Karen sat motionless at the defense table, hands folded, eyes empty. The tears were gone now. The shaking had stopped. Whatever mask she had worn for years, the concerned neighbor, the rule enforcer, the self-proclaimed protector of community standards, it was slipping fast. This phase wasn't about what she did anymore. It was about who she was. The prosecution went first. They called it the pattern. They didn't rush. They didn't dramatize. They let Karen's own history speak. The first witness was a woman from another state, different city, different HOA, same Karen. She stood at the stand, voice trembling. She terrorized us. The woman said, constant complaints, threats. She told us she'd make our lives hell until we left. The jury leaned forward. Next came a former HOA board member. We removed her from any authority role, he said. She was obsessive. She escalated every disagreement. She talked about taking matters into her own hands. Then came the police officer. He testified about a domestic disturbance from years earlier. Karen had pulled a gun on her own sister during an argument. Charges were dropped. Family pressure. Misunderstanding. The courtroom went silent. The prosecution showed messages Karen had sent to neighbors over the years. Rules exist to be enforced no matter the cost. Some people only understand force. If no one stops them, I will. Every sentence felt like another nail. Then the prosecution turned to motive. They brought up demographics, changing neighborhoods, Karen's complaints about declining standards, her comments about people like them. She never said it outright. She didn't have to. The hate lived between the lines. When it was the defense's turn, they tried to humanize her. They brought in a psychologist. Miss Karen suffers from anxiety and control disorders, he said. She perceived chaos as a threat. Perceived. They brought in a childhood friend who said Karen meant well and just cared too much. The jury didn't look convinced. Then Karen took the stand again. This time she didn't cry. She spoke calmly, coldly. I never wanted anyone dead, she said. I just wanted compliance. That sentence landed wrong. Even her own lawyer stiffened. The prosecutor stood for cross-examination. You brought a loaded gun to enforce HOA rules? Karen hesitated. I carry for protection. From trash cans. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. You had months of documented hostility toward this family. You photographed their children. You wrote about making them comply. And on the day of the murder, you approached their home armed. Karen's jaw tightened. I felt threatened. The prosecutor leaned in. By a mother holding a toddler? Silence. The prosecutor waited. No answer. Then came the moment that changed everything. The state introduced a recording, a jailhouse call. Karen's voice echoed through the courtroom speakers. I shouldn't have hesitated, she said on the call. If people would just follow rules, none of this would have happened. The jury froze. That wasn't remorse. That was regret for not being firmer. Karen looked up too late. She knew. Her face drained of color. The defense objected. Overruled. The judge stared directly at Karen. Do you have anything you'd like to say before the jury deliberates? Karen stood. She looked at me for the first time, not with guilt, with resentment. I didn't wake up planning to kill someone, she said. But society is collapsing because no one enforces standards anymore. Gasps filled the room. She sat down, and, in that moment, whatever sympathy she might have had evaporated. The prosecution's closing was quiet. This wasn't a crime of passion, the prosecutor said. It was a crime of entitlement, of power, of someone who believed rules mattered more than lives. Then it was over. The jury deliberated again. This time, it took less than 4 hours. I held my children's hands. They didn't fully understand what was happening, only that this decision mattered. When the jury returned, the forepersons stood. We unanimously find that the aggravating factors outweigh the mitigating factors. My heart pounded. We recommend the death penalty. Karen screamed. Not cried. Screamed. She had to be restrained. Her chair tipped. Deputies rushed in. The judge ordered silence. Sentencing was scheduled for the following week. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. I didn't speak. I didn't celebrate. Justice didn't feel like victory. It felt like gravity, heavy, unavoidable, and long overdue. But the story wasn't finished yet, because sentencing would force the court to confront one final question. Was this punishment about vengeance, or about finally drawing a line no one could cross again? The day of sentencing arrived colder than it should have been. Not the weather, the air inside the courthouse. Everyone felt it. Deputies, lawyers, reporters, even the judge. This wasn't just another case anymore. It had become a symbol, a line drawn between authority and obsession, between rules and humanity. Karen was brought in first. No sunglasses, no clipboard, no confidence. Her hands were cuffed. Her hair was gray, now, pulled back tight, like she was trying to hold herself together through force alone. She avoided looking at the gallery, but I could tell she knew exactly where I was sitting. Front row, center, with our children. The judge entered. Everyone stood. This court is now in session. The judge's voice was steady, but his eyes told a different story. He had presided over hundreds of cases, murders, assaults, life sentences, but this one weighed on him. Before sentencing, he said, "The court will hear final statements." The prosecution declined. They'd said everything that needed to be said. The defense stood. Karen's attorney spoke about mental health, about stress, about how one bad decision should not define a lifetime. But the words felt thin, recycled, hollow. Then the judge turned to me. Victim impact statement. I stood slowly. My legs shook, but my voice didn't. I talked about my wife, not her death, but her life. How she sang off key while making breakfast. How she stopped for every stray animal. How she believed rules existed to serve people, not the other way around. She died protecting our child, I said, not because she broke a rule, but because she believed kindness could calm cruelty. The courtroom was silent except for quiet sobs. I looked directly at Karen. You didn't just kill my wife, I said. You taught my children what hatred looks like, and I will spend the rest of my life teaching them it doesn't win. I sat down. Karen was asked if she wished to speak. She stood slowly. This time, there was no speech prepared. No one understands the pressure, she said. I was just trying to keep order. If rules disappear, society falls apart. The judge leaned forward. Ms. Karen, he said, do you take responsibility for your actions? She hesitated. I regret how things escalated. The judge closed his eyes. That was the moment. The last chance. And she missed it. The judge began reading the sentence. His words were deliberate, measured, final. This court finds that the defendant acted with premeditation, malice, and reckless disregard for human life. Karen's breathing quickened. The aggravating factors are overwhelming. The victim was unarmed. The victim was protecting a child. The crime was fueled by obsession, entitlement, and hate. The judge paused. Therefore, the room felt like it stopped moving. I sentence you to death. Karen collapsed, not gracefully, not quietly. She screamed. She thrashed. She had to be carried out. The judge banged the gavel. Court is adjourned. And just like that, it was over. Outside, the nation reacted. Headlines exploded. HOA dispute ends in death sentence. Rule enforcer becomes killer. Justice for mother slain in front of children. Some people cheered. Some people argued. Some said the punishment was too harsh. Some said it wasn't enough. I didn't comment, because justice doesn't need applause. In the weeks that followed, our neighborhood changed. HOA rules were rewritten. Authority was limited. Oversight was added. Karen's name was removed from everything. The house across the street went up for sale. No one wanted to live there. My children started therapy. They asked fewer questions now. They understood more than I wish they did. One night, my oldest asked me something I'll never forget. Daddy, is she gone forever? I thought carefully. She can't hurt anyone ever again, I said. That was the truth. But the story wasn't finished, because the appeals would come, the debates would rage, and one final moment, years later, would bring this nightmare to its absolute end. A moment that forced me to confront whether closure is real or just something we chase. Time didn't heal anything. It just taught us how to live around the pain. The years after the sentencing passed in strange, uneven pieces. Some days felt frozen in the moment my wife fell. Other days moved too fast, like life was dragging us forward whether we were ready or not. Karen was transferred to death row within months. The appeals began immediately, just like everyone said they would. Automatic appeals, procedural appeals, psychological evaluations, claims of ineffective counsel, claims of emotional distress, claims that the sentence was excessive. Each appeal reopened the wound. Each hearing meant another reminder that the woman who destroyed my family was still breathing, still eating meals, still sleeping at night. And every time I had to explain to my children why the case was back in court. Didn't the judge already decide? My youngest asked once. Yes, I said, but sometimes the system double-checks itself. What about Mommy? My child asked. Who double-checks her? I had no answer. The prosecution never wavered. They presented the same facts again and again. The evidence never changed. The intent never disappeared. The words Karen spoke on that porch never softened with time. Appeal after appeal was denied. The appellate judges wrote opinions that were cold, clear, and final. This was not an act of self-defense. This was not an accident. This was a deliberate escalation rooted in obsession, Karen aged rapidly. In the rare photos that leaked, she looked nothing like the woman who once stood behind that clipboard. Her hair thinned, her posture slouched, the anger seemed burned into her face permanently, like a scar no surgery could remove. She never apologized, not once. Her letters to the court weren't about remorse. They were about fairness, about how she was singled out, about how others break rules all the time. Even on death row, she was still enforcing standards in her mind. Life for us changed in quieter ways. We moved. I couldn't stay in that house anymore. Every corner held echoes. Every driveway looked like a crime scene. The bloodstain might have been cleaned, but memory doesn't bleach. We relocated to another city, another state. No HOA, no committees, just people. The kids grew. Birthdays passed. School plays. First days of class. Achievements my wife should have been there for. Every milestone came with joy and guilt for feeling it. Therapy helped. Slowly, I learned something important. Closure isn't a moment. It's a process. And sometimes it's unfinished. The final appeal was denied 8 years after the sentencing. The Supreme Court declined to hear the case. No explanation. Just a stamped refusal. A date was set. The notification came in a plain envelope. No drama. No ceremony. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time staring at it. The kids were older now. Teenagers. Old enough to understand what the date meant. Old enough to ask the hardest question. Are you going to watch it? My oldest asked. Executions are strange things. You're not required to attend. You're not expected to forgive. You're not promised peace. I thought about my wife's last moment, about her final instinct to protect, about how she didn't get a choice. Yes, I said, I think I need to. The execution was scheduled at night. Karen declined to make a final statement. That didn't surprise anyone. She was escorted into the chamber, restrained, silent. The chaplain offered words she didn't respond to. Witnesses sat behind the glass. I didn't look at Karen. I looked at the clock. When it was over, there was no thunder, no announcement, no relief, just a quiet confirmation. Time of death. I walked outside alone. The sky looked normal. Cars passed. The world didn't stop. And that's when I understood something painful and honest. Justice doesn't bring people back. It doesn't erase trauma. It doesn't fix what's broken. It only draws a boundary and says, this cannot be allowed again. When I got home, my kids were waiting. Is it done? One of them asked. Yes, I said. They hugged me, not because they were happy, but because it was finished. Or so we thought. Because one final moment, one unexpected realization, would change how I remembered everything. And it came from somewhere I never expected. I thought the story ended the night Karen died. I was wrong. Endings are rarely clean. Sometimes they wait for you, quiet, patient, until you think you're finally safe enough to hear the truth. It happened months later. We were unpacking old boxes in the garage, the kind you avoid because they smell like dust and memory. My youngest was helping, pulling out photo albums, school art, things my wife had carefully saved. Then I found it, a small notebook, her handwriting. I sat down on the cold concrete floor and opened it. It wasn't a diary. It was a record. Dates, times, notes, every HOA warning, every fine, every interaction with Karen. She had been documenting everything, quietly, carefully, long before I realized how serious it was. One page stopped me cold. She scares me, not because of the rules, but because she enjoys the power. If anything ever happens, I need this written down. My hands shook. I kept reading. My wife had tried to de-escalate. She'd written emails asking for mediation. She'd suggested community meetings. She'd even offered to move trash day duties around Karen's schedule, anything to keep peace. Karen never responded. Instead, my wife wrote about the looks, the staring, the way Karen stood across the street, watching the house like she was waiting for something. The last entry was dated the morning she died. If she comes today, I'll stay calm. I won't let fear win. The kids deserve better than this. I closed the notebook and cried harder than I had in years. Not because of pain, but because of clarity. My wife didn't die because of trash cans. She didn't die because of HOA rules. She died because someone believed control mattered more than life, and the system let that obsession grow unchecked for years. That realization changed everything. I stopped seeing Karen as just a monster. I saw her as a warning. Unchecked authority, unchallenged power. A culture that excuses cruelty when it hides behind rules. In the years since, I've spoken quietly to groups, parents, communities, even HOA boards. I don't shout. I don't threaten. I tell them this story, and I ask one simple question. At what point does enforcing rules stop being about order and start being about ego? The kids are grown now. They remember their mother not by how she died, but by how she lived. Kind, brave, calm in the face of ugliness. Sometimes they ask if I hate Karen. I answer honestly. No, I say, but I will never excuse what she became. Hatred gives people power. Memory gives us responsibility. This story isn't about revenge. It's not about punishment. It's about what happens when communities stop protecting people and start protecting systems instead. And now it's your turn. If this story moved you, subscribe. Because silence is how stories like this repeat. If you've ever dealt with an HOA nightmare, abuse of authority, or someone who thought rules made them untouchable, comment your experience below. And most importantly, if you believe kindness should never be punished, if you believe power must be questioned, if you believe people matter more than policies, share this story. Because the next time someone knocks on a door with a clipboard, someone else's life might depend on whether we learned this lesson or not.